everybody. This is Ruth Hoyt here. You're at the TexNet meeting, Texas Nature and Environmental Photographers. And today is Thursday, November 18th, just a week away from Thanksgiving. And we are going to have Susan Hansen, who is known as the Texas Bat Lady on Instagram, and do her talk on river time. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
As Ruth said, my name is Susan Hansen. I'm going to talk about underwater photography tonight. People wonder, why am I called the Bat Lady? And I don't do programs on bats, but I love bats and used to write about them when I worked for the newspaper. So that's kind of how I got that handle, I guess. I want to start by talking about how I got into underwater photography. It's kind of a roundabout story, but I'll start there. Probably 10, 12 years ago, I can't remember exactly when, my Labrador retriever needed to lose weight. And so I started taking her to the river every day to swim, and it actually worked. About the same time, I lost a job that I really, really cared about, and it kind of threw me into a tailspin. And it was sort of like one of those midlife crises where you go out and buy a red convertible, except I went out and bought a canoe because I really wanted to get into the water. So I get my canoe and I have visions of taking my Labrador retriever with me in the canoe, which I did, on a few occasions, but she would turn me over and that wasn't ideal. So I was at the river every day with her still. We were swimming and I saw kids snorkeling in the river. And I thought that looks like a great deal of fun. And so I'm going to do that. This is a picture of San Marcos City Park. And you can see the water was really, really high that summer. It's normally not up to the edge of the sidewalk that way. So I went down to the local dive shop and I bought the whole gear and got into it in a big way. And I've been snorkeling in the San Marcos River for probably 10 or 12 years. I've kind of lost track. This is a picture of me snorkeling in the winter. And as you can see, the steam behind me coming up off the water is an indication of how cold it was. I don't ordinarily wear a hood like that, but it was so cold that day that I had to. The water is 72 degrees year round, and I swim year round. I go once a week, every week. I miss a few weeks here and there, but ordinarily I'm in the river once a week. Once I started snorkeling, it took a little while, but I decided, maybe taking pictures underwater would be a cool thing to do. And so I went out and bought a little Coolpix, a Nikon Coolpix. This is one of the first pictures I took. It's not wonderful, but the color and the fact that there are these fish right in front of me just really sold me on the idea of taking pictures underwater. And so over time, I developed a real love for it. This is a quote that I picked up years ago from John Burroughs, who was a contemporary of John Muir from the Sierra Club. He says, "To learn something new, take the path that you took yesterday." And this is sort of my mantra when it comes to how I swim and how I take pictures underwater, at least. I followed the same path every week. I thought this might be a very good discipline for me because, can I find something new to photograph every week, something different? Can I pay attention that closely and come up with something that's remarkable every week? Because basically I'm seeing the same thing, seeing the same path every week. And this is the path that I take. It's about 2/3 of a mile round trip. I start at City Park and you can see the river kind of winds along. And it ends up at what we call the headwaters, which is actually a waterfall. There's an old dam there, and there's a lake, a waterfall, and then this route that I take. And like I said, it's about 2/3 of a mile round trip. I start at City Park and swim upstream against the current and then back down to where I started. Just a little bit of the technical things about what I do. What I use now is an Olympus TG6. When I got into this habit of photographing underwater, I did some research on what would be the best camera for me. I do not have a small fortune to spend on a camera. And unfortunately, there are kind of hobbyist models, and I apologize, my clocks are going to go off. There's the hobbyist level, and then there's this huge gap. And then there's the professional level, and the professional underwater cameras are super expensive. I could get a housing for my regular 35mm camera, my DSLR, but that's expensive as well. And so what I did was go with the best hobbyist camera that I could find. And the TG6 is generally considered to be the best. Anyway, so it's a fairly new model, got it about a year ago. And I use a fisheye lens, which screws on, so you can take it off underwater if you want to, which is a pretty cool feature. Just a few features about the camera. It's 12 megapixels, f2.0 lens. It's got underwater autofocus. To be honest, this camera will do a lot more than I know how to do with it. You can shoot manual with the camera, but I choose to shoot autofocus because, you know, you're shooting fast and you can't pay much attention to what you're doing in the water. Also, I do not have bifocal glasses underwater, and so I can't really read the dials. So messing with dials underwater wouldn't be a very good option. Under the autofocus underwater selection, you've got 4 options. You've got snapshot macro, microscope wide, actually 5 options, and HDR. And I shoot primarily on snapshot, but sometimes we'll use macro or microscope. It's got a built-in flash. You can shoot raw, and then underwater white balance. Okay, I just want to go over a little of what I do. After I've shot, you know, my photos, I come home and I use Bridge, Photoshop Bridge, to put my photographs in. This is what the page would look like. And then from there, go to RAW, where I can process the photograph a little bit more, and then send it out to Photoshop and finish it. Takes me a very long time to go through a bunch of photos, but this is the reason I have to do it. Here's a before shot of a Rio Grande cichlid, and then the after shot. This was just a photo I shot this week, actually Tuesday, I think. So you can see why it's important to spend the time processing them afterwards. This is another example. This is a sunfish before and after. And then this is a really dramatic example. This was actually taken in the lake, which is an artificial lake that was created right at the headwaters of the San Marcos River. It's federally protected water, and so I don't get to go in there very often. There has to be a good reason for me to be there. And this was a fairly recent experience I had swimming in the lake. The sun rays coming into the water were just amazing. And that's the difference, the before and after. The challenges of shooting underwater where I am, these may be different elsewhere, but the challenges that I have are these. I prefer to swim on cloudy days because you get less shadow and the light is just much better. Another challenge would be particulates in the water show up like crazy. the San Marcos River is exceptionally clear. The water coming out of the springs, and there are like 200 springs that feed the river. It's very, very high quality water. It's drinkable if you want to drink it. I choose not to, but it's very clear ordinarily. Sometimes people are working, pulling invasive plants out or kind of underwater gardening, that kind of thing. And that stirs up the water. Rain will do the same thing. So cloudy water and particulates in the water really mess up the photographs. Another challenge is that the subjects are constantly moving. Unless I'm photographing a plant or just the way the light's hitting the water, the subjects move, they don't stay still. And so do I. I'm swimming against a very strong current. And so it's not like you're just standing there in the water. You're moving, they're moving. And so it's kind of hard to get good shots. And then another challenge is that I'm multitasking. In addition to taking pictures, I'm picking up trash as I swim. And so I'm swimming with a trash bag under my left arm and my camera in my right hand. And that's how I do it. And it's sometimes a little tricky. Okay, I thought what I would do is just show you what I photograph and talk about the species that I come in contact with, and then see if you have questions about them. Fish are the most obvious subject. Most of these fish in this photograph are Rio Grande cichlids, but there's some sunfish in there also. Okay, speaking of sunfish, they're the most plentiful fish that you're going to see. And they do just kind of swarm around you. Sunfish kind of like to be around a swimmer because you stir up things that they like to eat. And so they hang out. This is one of the sunfish. It's quite pretty. It's a red breast sunfish. And I sometimes forget that it's an introduced sunfish. It's not native, but people kind of consider it to be a native because it's so plentiful. It's another example of one. Sunfish, to me at least, are very hard to identify. I think this is a green sunfish, but I wouldn't bet money on it. They also hybridize, so it's sometimes hard to tell what you're looking at unless it's just a real obvious example. This one is a bluegill. And the main reason I know that is there's a blue dot on the dorsal fin up there. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what it was. This one is a pretty obvious one. It's a red ear sunfish, and you can tell what it is by the red patch on the side of its head. This is one of the most fun sunfish for me to photograph or to interact with. It's a large sunfish, a very sturdy fish. They can be kind of menacing looking sometimes. They're very aggressive. That's another photograph of them. I say they're very aggressive, and that's an example of what they kind of how they look at you. One of the things I like to do in the summer is to look for fish nests. Sunfish in particular are pretty easy to spot when they have a nest. What they do is they use their fins to kind of hollow out a place in the gravel or sand, and then they lay their eggs in that. The males are the ones who build the nest and they guard the nest quite aggressively. If you get too close to the nest, they will come after you. They'll swim toward you, threatening you. And then if you don't move, they go back and do it again. Sometimes when I put my hand out to get a close-up picture of one of these fish, they'll bump my hand, which is kind of surprising sometimes. Or they just kind of bump you when you don't even know they're there. It's another example. They can look pretty grumpy. This is an example of a fish nest. It's the red ear sunfish nest, and those are all fish eggs. And that's not a good picture, but it's a kind of a shows how they look at you and how close they get. Largemouth bass can also be kind of threatening looking. They're the largest fish that I see, and they're the apex predator in the river. They will eat fry of other fish, and I guess that's one of their favorite things. You can see why they're called largemouth bass. That mouth is just enormous. I say they're kind of aggressive. They don't really charge at you like the red breast sunfish do, but they will swim very close and then just kind of, you know, bypass you. And they look at you like that. One of the prettiest fish, I think, is the Rio Grande cichlid. And as you can tell from the name, it's not native to San Marcos. It's a South Texas fish. It was probably introduced here maybe in the 20s as a sport fish. They're supposedly kind of fun to catch. I don't know. To me, they look very docile, but apparently they're not quite as docile as they look. Here's an example of a whole school of Rio Grande cichlids. They tend to school together in pretty good numbers, which is really fun to see. Their faces, I think, are just intriguing. Another example of schooling fish. You can tell when they're coming into the breeding season because the females will turn white like that. Their whole face will become white. And that's kind of fun to watch. This is an example of a Rio Grande cichlid nest. Unlike the sunfish, they don't hollow out a bowl in the sand or anything like that. They just lay their eggs wherever. They're kind of out in the open. This is on a rock right in the middle of the river. I don't have a good picture of this, but I think that was the day that I got to watch little tiny fish coming out of the eggs, and it was really remarkable to see. But you have to really keep your eyes open for this kind of stuff. And that's an example of one looking at me very close up. This is just a quick video of swimming with the fish. You kind of feel like you're in a giant aquarium when they're just swimming around you like that. Okay, another fish that's kind of an unusual fish, and I didn't know what this was for the longest time. It's a gray red horse. I identified it as something else, and I put my photographs up on Facebook as well as on Instagram. In fact, most of them are on Facebook. And I found that one of the quickest ways to find out what something is to put it up with the wrong name, and somebody will immediately tell you you're wrong and this is what it is. And there's a fish biologist who for some reason was noticing my page, and he's the one who told me what this was, gray red horse. Ordinarily, I see just a couple, and they tend to swim down toward the bottom. They're kind of bottom feeders. And this particular day, there were, gosh, 7 of them, which was very unusual. This is probably my favorite fish to see because it's so unusual. The spotted gar, you'll see a lot if you take the glass bottom boat ride in Spring Lake. In the river itself, it's a little harder to see them, mainly because they're in the vegetation, if they're there at all. And so they're not out in the open. This particular day, I was kind of hiding behind some vegetation and peeked around looking for some cichlids, I think. And I saw this tail go by and realized, oh my gosh, it's a gar. And there it was. And this is not the gar that people are afraid of. That's the alligator gar. The spotted gar is perfectly docile. It's not going to bother you. The patterns on the back are just amazing. This is an example of a gar that I took a photograph of in the lake itself. That's why it's so far down. The lake is 30 feet at the deepest. This was probably 15 feet of water, something like that. But you can tell how large it is by comparing it to the sunfish that's just off to its left. It's quite a big fish. This is probably one of the strangest fish, the Guadalupe darter. It's called a darter because it indeed darts. First time I saw it, and I'm so sorry about these clocks, but we live in a house full of clocks. Let me wait just a second till they're done. Okay. The weird thing about the Guadalupe darter, and it's a very tiny fish, this may be a couple of inches long. It has no swim bladder, and so it doesn't swim. And the first time I saw it, I thought, what the heck is that? Is a salamander or something? It was on the bottom of the river, and it looked like it was just kind of scooting along the bottom. And that's sort of what it does. It scoots very fast, though, so it's called the darter. It's a relative of the fountain darter, which is an endangered species that lives in the San Marcos River. We have 8 endangered species in the river. We're getting ready to lose one of them, though, because one of them, which is the San Marcos gambusia, was on the list of species that are going to be delisted and considered extinct. So that's the Guadalupe darter. Mexican tetras are very interesting fish. They're also non-native, but they're pretty innocuous fish. They're not considered, I guess they're technically invasive, but they aren't considered a threat at all. They're very small fish. They're basically your aquarium fish. They were probably introduced to the river as bait fish. And here we go. They're very large schools of fish, and they're really kind of funny to watch because they frighten, they swim away, and then they swim back right around you. So they just kind of circle you, which is really funny. Here's what they look like closer up. And remember, they're swimming fast. So getting a good picture of one of these is kind of a lucky thing. Okay, here's another little video. What it's like to be in the middle of a bunch of tetras. Usually they stay in more of a line, kind of in formation. These are just kind of swimming willy-nilly. Another kind of fish that we have that's very small, these are even smaller than the tetras. These are shiners. And I think, again, I'm hesitant to say for sure what they are, but I think they're ironside shiners, which are a relic population of a shiner that's not found anywhere else around here. They're found elsewhere in Texas, but not around here. And that's an example of what they look like. Sometimes you'll find them swimming with the tetras. Sometimes they're in their own little school near the tetras, but they behave very much like the tetras do. They swim fast right around you and don't seem to go far, though. And then they're the mosquito fish, which I think are really funny. You can see they're kind of oddly shaped. And I don't know if you can tell or not, but this water is exceptionally shallow. It's maybe a foot deep. And they seem almost translucent to me. They're hard to see because they swim right up on the surface of the water. They like mosquito larvae. And so that's where they're going to find them. That's a mosquito fish up close. And this is not a good picture, but it's kind of a funny picture in that the fish is at the bottom. The top is the reflection of the fish. And that's something that you get in the San Marcos River because, again, it's so clear that you get interesting reflections in the underside of the water like that. That's mosquito fish enjoying my hand and my hand being reflected and they're reflected. And it's kind of a fun picture to look at. Okay, the next two fish are invasive species. And these are two fish that are hunted, basically. We have a person in San Marcos who's employed simply to get out invasive fish from the river, and he spearfishes. And twice a year, we have spearfishing competitions, and people get out the plecostomus, which are also called suckermouth catfish. And you can see why they hang onto the sides of things. In this case, there's a wall in one of the university park, and that's where you'll find a lot of these. And once the fish are caught and turned in, they're cooked for the public. It's a free fish, not a fish fry. We have fish tacos. And the other fish is the tilapia, the blue tilapia. They're also invasive, and these are kind of interesting fish to watch. They also nest in some very obvious ways in kind of shallow water. They'll nest up in a slough that runs into the river, and they fight each other. And it's kind of scary to see. Probably my favorite thing, I enjoy seeing the fish, of course, but I love seeing the turtles. And it's a real coup if I see a turtle on a swim. This is an example of a river cooter, which is what this one is too. This is a turtle just basically swam up to me one day, and it took me almost off guard. I almost didn't get a picture of it because it was so surprising to see it. And then sometimes you'll turn your head and there's one just kind of hanging out on top of some vegetation. You can see that their shells get pretty covered in algae as they get older. You can tell these turtles because they have yellow, kind of a yellow and green head and yellow along the sides of their faces. They're very common. You might look at this one and say, oh, isn't that cute, a mother and a baby? But it's not. It's a female turtle, the larger one, and a male turtle, kind of hassling her right behind her. The males are much smaller. Another example of a female and a male. And you can see on the male that there's a long tail as well. Snapping turtles. There are 5 species of turtles in the river here. I'm going to show you 4 of them. The snapping turtles, I don't see that often. There are a lot of them, but I don't see them that much. This is an example of what happens when you aren't paying attention. This was in about 10 feet of water. And the day that I got this picture, I was diving for cans, aluminum cans. And you can see there's one right by the turtle. I had been diving down, getting cans, and I took them up to the surface and turned around and looked down. And it's like, oh my God, there's an enormous turtle right where I've been gathering cans. It was right there the whole time and I didn't see it. That kind of alarmed me. I didn't go back down after that. You can tell it's a really old turtle from the leeches on it. That's kind of gross looking, but that's what that is. Red-eared sliders, I don't see as often. We do have a good many of them, but I just don't see them where I'm swimming quite as often as I see the river cooters. They're very pretty turtles. As they get older, they're harder to identify though, because they turn black. They're melanistic red-eared sliders at that point. And then the tiniest turtle is the musk turtle. You know, when you see that one, you might say, oh, a baby turtle, but no, it's just a little turtle. I wish I had the figures of how big it is, maybe 6 inches, something like that. It's very small. That said, it's also very ferocious looking. It tries to scare you and doesn't do a very good job, but anyway, tries to. That's an example of a baby musk turtle. I think I mentioned a minute ago that there's removal of invasive plants that goes on periodically. And I've gotten to know the crews that go out and do that. And one day they were removing some invasives and some floating plant matter that had been getting in the way. And they have to go through that material very carefully because they find things like this, a baby turtle or a baby crawdad or a crawdad, something small, or maybe even a fountain darter, the endangered fish. Speaking of crawdads, this is a swamp crayfish, which I still call a crawdad. I tend to see these more on cloudy days. They tend to be hiding in something. When I do encounter them and they see me, they come at you pretty ferociously like that. And then this is just an example of what you might do with the macro lens. Very, very small snail that we have there in the river. This is another kind of snail, ram's horn snail. It's invasive. I've never seen a live one, but they're in the river. Okay, plants are probably what I photograph the most. And what the San Marcos River is probably best known for is Texas wild rice, which is an endangered species. It grows nowhere else in the world. It grows from the headwaters down probably a couple of miles and then stops. I've been involved, maybe 4 or 5 years in doing what they call the wild rice survey, where we go out and measure stands of rice to see how well it's doing. And that's how I got to know some folks who were involved in river biology, and that's been a big help to me. An example of Texas wild rice in the fog one winter morning. And that's Texas wild rice after our big freeze last winter. It's interesting that just weeks later, it was green again. So it's pretty hardy stuff. Because the current is so fast, you get a lot of interesting movement underwater with the rice, and it's really very pretty. Also kind of creepy when you're in the middle of it sometimes. And this is what it's like to swim against the current. The rice is moving, and the rice is actually thicker than it is here. This was probably, I don't remember when I shot this, but I was swimming through rice the other day that was, in my face. It was much thicker than this. It's just undulating. I really enjoy watching it. Another species that is fun to photograph is pondweed. And I like it because it captures the light so well. This depends on how the light's shining. It will look gold, it will look yellow, it will look red. Here's an example of green. Ludwigia is another native plant. It can be bright red like that. One of the comments, I guess, that I got after I started posting pictures of the river, people said, I didn't know that was down there. I didn't know that we had that much color in the river here. And we do, we have a great deal of color. This is a pretty little plant. There's actually a terrestrial version of it, pennywort. The river was closed, basically. Access to the river was closed during the early part of the pandemic because you had to access it through the city parks, the University Park, and the parks were closed. And so the plants had an opportunity to just go crazy. And one of the plants that really benefited from no people in the river was pennywort. And so it's spread a lot over the last couple of years. That's wild rice and pennywort. Kabamba is another native. It's a pretty interesting plant, very frilly, pretty plant. But what makes it so interesting is this. It blooms underwater. It's the only plant I know of that does that. Certainly the only one in our river that does that. Sagittaria, also called arrowroot. You can tell because it looks like an arrow. Stargrass, which can get up to 6 feet tall. And then this grows on the bottom of the river in some places, is filamentous algae, which is just a beautiful shade of green. Hygrophila is an introduced plant, probably from aquariums. It's one of the ones that they pull out. And you can tell it's Hygrophila and not Ludwigia because it doesn't have red on the underside of the leaf. I learned that from my biologist friends. And then coontail is a plant that grows in the lake. It's native to the lake, but it's a problem because they cut the coontail. It would grow up, 12 feet tall and be a real problem if they didn't cut it. So they basically mow it and then it floats downstream and it creates a problem because it does that. Makes a mat of vegetation like that. One of the things that I really enjoy about the river, and this is how it's different every time I go, the color changes. It depends on the light. I tend to go in the morning because I like the light that time of day. But even then, it's different every time. And you don't really know what color you're getting till you get home and look at the photographs on the computer. Green is an obvious example. The undersurface of the water reflects whatever's down there. And so green, it's predominant. Color of the plants is sometimes beautiful. Not always a good combination, but in this case, I thought it was. Gold is pretty common. Kind of a moody blue, depends on how sunny the day is. Pastels sometimes. Gold. This is one of my favorites because you get to see the undulation of the rice as well as the color of the water. Contrasting colors are sometimes nice. This is arrowroot Sagittaria. No, excuse me, it's eelgrass. I'm sorry, eelgrass and Ludwigia. And then rice, always rice. Wild rice, and what's surrounding it is actually debris. It's like bark and little pieces of twigs and whatnot that have collected. Rice and pennywort. And then probably the most unpredictable photographs come from reflections and ripples and just the way the light's hitting the water. Reflections, I think, are just a lot of fun to get. Which way is up? It's hard to tell. This is probably, well, it's less than a foot of water. And by the way, that rock is pretty hard to swim over, but it's what you have to do in places. This is actually taken in the lake where I was working one day, helping out with a project. And it was morning and the sun was just at a wonderful angle. Get some nice shadows. Another odd reflection. Sun coming through the water. This is kind of a weird picture. I was sticking the camera partially out of the water, but most of it was in the water, and got that odd reflection of rock and I'm not sure what else. These are examples of over-under photos, which are a lot of fun to take. I do a lot of them. Most of them don't turn out very well, mainly because the water is moving and it's hard to get a good shot when the water's splashing up over your face. Again, this is in maybe a foot of water. What you're looking at is the waterfall where the lake empties into the river. And that building there has been a restaurant for many years. It started out as a mill, and that's where the dam came from, dam and the waterfall. It's now opened up again as another restaurant. It's really interesting to compare the light above and below the water. This was on a very gray day, and I think it was a February day in the University Park, which is right next to the city park. You have the bright green of the rice below and the gray winter day above. More rice. And this was an even grayer day in City Park with steam coming off the river and green underneath. Something else that I do is I enjoy comparing places in the river before and after events. And this was before a flood and after a flood. You can see the rice at the top, very lush. At the bottom, it was gone. This was in 2015. The rice has since come back in, gangbusters, which is amazing, given what it looked like just 6 years ago. Okay, I mentioned a project that was something I was working on in the lake. There's a crew that's been going out once a month. They're employed by the university, by the Meadows Center at the university, which studies aquatic life and whatnot. Anyway, they've gone out about once a month to collect golf balls out of Spring Lake. Spring Lake is part of what used to be called Aquarena Springs. It was an amusement park, and connected to the amusement park was a golf course with a slough. And the slough was basically the water hazard. And so it was full of golf balls. Well, the last major flood we have, which was 2015, all these golf balls washed out into the river. A lot of them stayed in the lake. Those that washed into the river have been, collected over the years. I collected a bunch. Other people have collected a lot too, but there are tons of them still left in the river. I mean, in the lake. This was a picture taken in the river right after the flood. This is taken from a video of me collecting golf balls. You can see it's very shallow where I'm working. It's very silty. And basically you see a golf ball and you start sticking your hand through the silt, and there are more and more and more and more. They've collected probably 20,000 of these golf balls so far. And that's just this year. This is 35 pounds of golf balls that I collected right after the 2015 flood. I brought these home. It was very stupid because that sack weighed a ton. At least lugging it out of the water was really hard. And I got $20 for those. Other trash that I've found, and these are not necessarily pictures I'm showing you because they're great photography, but just to show you what goes on in the river. This is a selfie I took. I'm hauling a traffic cone back to City Park where I get out. And that's the trash I got that day. I always take a picture of the trash I collect just to kind of have a record of what's there. And sometimes it's weird stuff. Like having a traffic cone was pretty weird. This was from Tuesday. Actually, no, Tuesday of last week, I think it was. Quite a lot of trash that day, but that's typical. I do it once a week and usually don't get quite this much, but you get a lot. And it's weird stuff, like I said. The weirdest thing I've probably found is one of those plastic floor mats that goes under a desk chair. And that was quite large. How it got in the river, I don't know. I always go through my trash very carefully, partly to separate the recyclables from the trash, but also to see if there's something hiding in the trash, like this fella. This day there was a crawdad hiding in a glass insulator. One day I had 3 crawdads in my trash, and that was kind of fun. And that's it. And see if you have any questions or thoughts.
Well, Susan, that was totally fascinating. I
you.
always enjoy your pictures on Instagram. That's where I see you. And that was just totally fascinating. The water is so clear and the pictures are beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, you all are silent.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think it's probably because you did such a good job of saying what you do and how long you've been doing it and telling us the names of the plants and all the different things. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, I have a question for some of you. You know that something I started doing with Dara during the pandemic was going camping. Because since there were not many places to go that you could go, with other people, then we started kind of camping around. And it never occurred to me to actually bring a regular camera to take pictures. And we went to Garner's. The water was super clear. And so what is the camera that you use again? Because I mean, that would be something nice to start doing.
Yeah. It's an Olympus TG6.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be, I mean, it was very informative and nice, to see what you can do, in a different type of photography. And,
yeah,
now with the camping thing, well, we try to go to places that has water.
yeah.
And so it becomes a challenge of you cannot bring your regular camera. But definitely that's something we could do.
Yeah, you mentioned Garner on the Frio River, and I've done underwater photography in the Frio, just down the road in Concan. And it's too is very shallow, but you can get some remarkable pictures, and lots of rocks, lots of pretty cypress trees, and some fish. So I highly recommend that. It's fun.
Yeah. That we've been thinking about, and we haven't like our plan is to start going to different parks. Like we're trying to go now to Austin, and but definitely the camera. We usually think about taking one of our cameras, but since we like to go in the water, it is not like on top of our list. Just because you don't want to mess your regular camera.
Right.
But it never occurred to us just to get a camera to do photography underwater. That was like a different, interesting side of photography, definitely.
The Nikon Coolpix is also a good camera for this use. Just shop around, see what price range you want to fall
We
into.
have an Olympus, but it's one of the old versions.
Uh-huh.
Like it's quite a bit old. It's like 5, maybe more years. And so, but definitely investment that we can consider. Really like your pictures. Enjoy it.
Is
Did
that
you
camera
say-
waterproof?
It's waterproof, yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
waterproof down to 50 feet, but I just snorkel. I don't dive. And so I've never tried it deeper than maybe 10 feet.
Yeah, one of my friends down here in the valley, Marilyn LaMantia, bought one after talking with Susan, and she uses it in the river also. So she's enjoyed having it.
I've taken that camera with me to Norway, where I went swimming in an arm of the North Sea, which was quite fun. And then also up to British Columbia, off of a little island we were staying on. So as long as the water's clear, I'm good snorkeling in it. I don't like snorkeling in water I can't see through. So the camera works really well, either in fresh or salt water, whatever.
Wonderful. Well, if anybody doesn't have any further questions, I think we'll close out this session.